Sanding the hull of the clipper ship Flying Cloud. Hi, this is model Shipwright Steve Priske.
Alright, well here's the part where we turn lemon into lemonade. Now that the primary planking of the clipper ship Flying Cloud is complete, it's going to be a time to do the sanding, the real critical sanding. And so I'm going to take about an hour to 2 hours to do this. Always take your time, because applying that second layer of planking and then the copper plates, what's going to make them look good is making sure that the hull is perfectly shaped. So after those first layer of planks are applied, this is the time where you really have to turn lemon into lemonade. Now, as I've explained in setting up your model shop video, some of the tricks that I use, one of them is this specially curved piece of wood that I apply my sanding paper to on both sides. And as you can see, this comes in real handy on the curved portion of the hull, where you're trying to maintain a little bit of curvature where you're doing your sanding. Obviously more effective than a flat piece of sandpaper that might flatten that curve out a little too much. So that's one of my favorite tricks. Another one that I pointed out, this will really extend the life of your sandpaper, is one of these devices. It's like a rubber, I don't know, rubber tube or whatever. You rub that on your sandpaper and it'll double, triple the life of the sandpaper. Alright, so I'll be back to you in a couple of hours. Alright, well, here's some really sweet lemonade. This is the Flying Cloud, fully sanded, ready for final planking and copper plates. Man, is this ship, the hull of this thing sleek looking. You could really see what Donald McKay was after when he designed the hull of this model, or a hull of this ship in this model. It's really pretty amazing. She really has a very small, tiny stern. The Flying Cloud has elliptical stern. In fact, it was commented quite often by neighboring ships when they were parked next to each other, anchored next to each other, that they said, well, she sure looks a lot like a yacht. And she really does have a lot of lines of a yacht in the back part of the ship right here. She does have a very flat floor design. Her previous ship, the one that Donald McKay built just before this, the Staghound, had what was called a V-bottom, which is also very yacht-like, and that really couldn't hold quite as much cargo as this kind of a bottom. And also it turns out that this little bit wider hull, even though you're trying to make an extreme clipper, which means you want to keep it as sleek as possible, this little wider hull with a flat bottom was faster in high winds. In lighter winds, the V-shaped type hulls and the smaller clipper ships are actually faster than these big ships like the Flying Cloud, this 225-foot long ship. But in the real heavy winds, especially going around Cape Horn and then coming up the west coast of South America, these flat-bottomed, wide ships, this is 40-foot beam on the Flying Cloud, were much faster. They could really handle it. Man, they pick up and just sail like crazy. So the final sanding is done. I've also done the bulkheads, by the way. I planked the inside of the bulkheads before I lay the final deck in. That way the bulkheads actually will extend below the edge of the decking. Makes it look a lot more professional, a lot more like the real ship. And one last little trick that I do before I actually lay in the decking is I curve the top of the bulkheads a little bit, camfer them a little bit, so the deck has a little bit of a curvature to it, which is the way real ships' decks are, so that the water runs off. So I want to make sure that is replicated once I glue down the deck, so I have now camfered off the top of the bulkhead just a little bit. Alright, let me show you some of the close-up woodwork before it's going to be covered up here by the painting and the second layer of planking. This is where you see a lot of the dovetail work that you have to do, coming in along the elliptical stern. This is sort of cool. I managed to get one single piece of wood to curve for me and wrap around for the top part of the stern there, so I didn't have to splice in a second piece of wood. That's sort of nice. And here along the midships you can see a lot of the dovetail splices that were necessary for lengthening the wood planks, because the planks weren't quite the length of the ship itself. The ship's about 28-29 inches of planking, and these planks I think are about 20 inches long. So So that's why they were spliced in there. Again, now this is all seamless. Here's what the big difference with clipper ships. People always ask me, say, well, what makes a clipper ship so fast, or why were they always talked about so much? Up until the clipper ships, for about 400 years, the shape of the hull of ships were almost always the same. They had this very bulbous, round kind of a hull, especially at the bow. And it was always thought that with the real pointy nose like this, a pointed bow, you'd have a real hard time controlling a ship when it was turning, when it was tacking. And that really is a problem. You do have to keep a sharp eye on ships like clipper ships, or they can get out of hand. But this kind of a fat, bulbous hull just isn't going to be very fast. And these things would max out at about 7-8 knots. Whereas ships like the Flying Cloud can sail up to 17-18 knots, 25 miles an hour. That's pretty astounding. Now, the reason that the Flying Cloud is so important in this story of tall ships and of sailing ships is that she was the very fastest ship of sail ever afloat. Period. I mean, she set the world record on her maiden voyage from New York to San Francisco under 90 days. And then 4 years later, after that, she's a little bit weather-worn and so on, she beats her own record of 90 days, which has never been exceeded, ever, by a commercial sailing vessel from East Coast to West Coast. So a lot of that is shown in the hull design that Donald McKay designed for this ship. That's where the speed comes from, a lot of it. The entry lines right here, these sleek entry lines of an extreme clipper ship, and these yacht-like exit lines in the back right here. And it's really cool how smooth the hull of this ship is, how sleek she feels. Anyway, next is going to be planking the second layer of planks, which I'll document, as well as laying the copper plates on the hull of the ship, Flying Cloud. Stay tuned.